Boeing 747, the world's first wide-bodied jet. So wide, the Wright brothers' historic flight was shorter than its wingspan.
The quantum leap in technology of that airplane was just extraordinary.
And it was much more than just a big aircraft.
This airplane allowed every person on Earth the opportunity to get an airplane and fly anywhere else.
But there's a hidden story to the Jumbo.
It was a fight all the way.
It was a billion-dollar gamble that stretched technology to the limits.
The whole engine would move and the structure was obviously shaken, and you'd hear a very loud bang.
Pushing the Boeing company close to financial meltdown.
Boeing gambled the company millions of dollars on this project.
But when it did fly, it soared off into the history books.
The vision of that airplane, as big as it was, lifting off for the first time, was just magic.
It became an icon, the most recognized aircraft in the world.
When a 747 pulls up to the gate, people take pictures of it. Little kids point at it.
Flying through bad times.
I didn't think I was going to die. I knew I was going to die.
On to serve her country.
When it came to game day and time to move the President of the United States, the 747 was ready to go.
The Jumbo has transported the equivalent of 80% of the human race.
The 747 rated on a 1 to 10 scale, it has to be a 10. It's solid state, if you will. You know, it's majestic.
The plane that created a revolution and changed the world. This is the latest generation Jumbo, the 747-8. One of the world's largest and most advanced jet airliners. Its massive engines can take it close to the speed of sound.
Lufthansa 796 cleared for takeoff, runway 18. Yes. Go.
The 747 rapidly accelerates to the speed of a Formula One racing car.
Rotate.
Effortlessly lifting over 400 tons into the night sky. But the story of how this iconic aircraft became such a success was far from trouble-free. The 747 story started on a quiet fishing trip in Alaska with two giants of the aviation world. One trip, the powerful yet suave owner of Pan Am told Bill Allen, the no-frills boss of Boeing, of his vision for a superplane. Tripp wanted an aircraft 2.5 times larger than anything that had gone before.
This was the early days of commercial jet travel. One trip at Pan American Airways saw an opportunity here for a bigger airplane to take advantage of this growth. An airplane with 400 seats that could carry more people and make more revenue.
Both men were reaching retirement, and they wanted to go out with a bang.
Gentlemen?
It was the largest commercial aircraft order in history. Tripp signed a contract for 25 747s. A deal worth a staggering $3.7 billion in today's money. And Bill Allen agreed Tripp could have them in just 28 months. It set an almost impossible challenge for Boeing's engineers.
This was all new technology. You remember, this airplane was going to be twice the size of any commercial airplane in existence. And the time constraints, the schedule that they put on themselves was incredibly tight.
Nobody had any idea of what it should look like. So the first stage was to draw preliminary designs. Heading the new 747 division was a young engineer, Joe Sutter. It was his first big break.
They gave me 20 people to do preliminary studies, and we were on our own, and all we knew it was bigger. They wanted the airplane to have good range, and they wanted the airplane to go as fast as it could.
Now in his 90s, Joe Sutter looks back on the impossible challenge he was given. Back then, as a junior engineer, he sometimes faced a hostile reception from those more senior.
I had to do a little bit of education that I was the boss. And I'd kiddingly tell them if they didn't want to go along with my orders, I had a good assignment in Bangladesh I could send them to.
They had just 28 months to get the 747 into the air. Sutter's team worked around the clock. But despite the size of their challenge, they were not Boeing's #1 priority. Most of the company's resources and best talent were being diverted into another aircraft.
We were certainly not the only kids on the block as far as the 747 program was concerned. The real hot button item around Seattle was the supersonic transport airplane.
This is what Boeing believed was the future. A supersonic transporter to travel 3 times the speed of sound. It was designed to outfly its European supersonic rival, Concorde, also in its design phase. And when Boeing's SST came into service, the 747 was to be relegated to shipping freight.
Now, the SST was the future of flight. Nobody was going to want to fly on a subsonic plane when you can get on a supersonic transport and fly 2.5 times the speed of sound and get to your destination in a fraction of the time.
And the 747 was just almost an afterthought. They didn't expect to build more than 50 of these airplanes, and they expected mostly to be transports, but it'd be sort of like a stopgap until they got this airplane running. So obviously, the 747 was playing second fiddle the whole time.
Sutter's team was shoved into old premises and starved of resources.
The engineers who were working the supersonic transports felt, I think, that they were a little bit superior to some of the other folks around the place.
Everybody now thinks that the 747 was the queen of the skies and everything was very in good shape. Well, that wasn't the case at all. There was a fight all of the way.
But Sutter was undaunted.
Joe Sutter was the kind of person that comes along once in a lifetime. He happened to be exactly the right person at exactly the right time for the right kind of challenge.
Before Sutter and his team could get down to the nuts and bolts of the design, they had to come up with the basic shape. Boeing had promised the aircraft in 28 months, but nobody had a clue what the 747 should look like. The 747 is the most distinctive airliner in the skies.
Most of us, when we fly, we don't know what airplane we're on. A lot of people don't know what type of a plane they're flying. But when you fly a 747, you know you're flying a 747 because of that distinctive hum.
But the shape might have ended up very different from the one we know today. Pan Am boss One Trip demanded an ocean liner of a design with 2 narrow decks, one on top of the other.
The first idea that came about was taking a conventional 707-sized airplane and taking 2 of those single-aisle fuselages and putting them together. And that's the airplane you see here. And from what I know from Joe is that they didn't like this idea very well.
One Trip, you know, he was sort of a Navy man. He wanted an airplane with round windows like portholes.
Sutter's gut feeling was it looked like a turkey.
We sat and looked at the requirements for an airplane like that and decided there's so many problems with the double-decker, there's got to be a different solution.
Sutter worried that in an emergency, passengers would not jump off a top deck 25 feet above the ground. Then his team had a eureka moment.
And my people came up with the idea, well, why not go to a wide single-deck airplane?
Rather than put two decks on top of each other, Sutter's team put them side by side. And what would be the world's first wide-bodied aircraft was created. But there was a problem for the freighter version. Opening the nose was the best solution for loading, but where to put the cockpit? Then, in a stroke of genius, Sutter decided it should go on top. And so the distinctive hump was born.
To think outside the box of something larger took several leaps of faith. Today it seems commonplace, but 40 years ago it was not.
We had a hell of a time convincing our own management first that that was the way to go.
Boeing management agonized that Tripp, who was paying, would go ballistic if he didn't get his double-decker. They decided to tell him the bad news, but banned Sutter from going.
We had this presentation in New York. I didn't go to it because my management felt I'd pushed too hard and would maybe get one Tripp upset, so I sent a fellow named Milt Heinemann, who did our interior design, who was a lot more amiable guy than me.
Heinemann set off to the Pan Am offices, armed with a secret weapon in his briefcase. He had to convince Tripp that his passengers wouldn't be squashed in a single deck. He had just one shot, and it was time for his secret weapon.
Can you help me, please?
Heinemann showed with a 20-foot clothesline just how wide the 747 would be. It was a startling piece of theater. No one had imagined such a cathedral of the air, almost double the width of any airliner built before.
It didn't convince Juan Tripp right away, but his people were astounded. And all of a sudden, this opened up all these possibilities. It was a moment of discovery.
Tripp eventually bought the idea when he saw a mock-up of what his plane would look like. Sutter got the go-ahead for the first wide-body jet in history. But now they had to turn a wooden mock-up into a real flying machine, and in record time. The race was on.
He drove his team hard. He just had this wonderful leadership style that helped him to push through and motivate people to get things done. I don't think there's anybody in the world who would have been better or could have even done what Joe Sutter did.
We were working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. And, quite frankly, I would rather have been at the plant than any place else. It was just wonderful.
As work on the prototype got underway, just how large this aircraft would be hit home.
One of the first impressions one had of the real size of the airplane was when we first put a cross-sectional drawing of the engine up on the office wall and really realized the office wall wasn't quite big enough.
And then you walked through a regular entry door, and there was the airplane. And it was just breathtaking.
75,000 drawings detailed how every last part fitted into the prototype. While in wind tunnels, they evaluated the aircraft. It was a model. Only the first flight would tell how it would fly. But these tests were critical. They needed to get it right, or the consequences for Boeing could have been disastrous.
The airplane business is completely different than any other business. You're committing $10 billion to just throw out a number. You're stuck with it. So you better do it right or forget it.
Boeing wouldn't make any real money until it delivered an aircraft that flew. If Sutter got it wrong, the costs could have destroyed Boeing for good. Today, at Boeing's massive Everett plant in Washington state, 747s are still rolling off the production line. Here they have the capacity to turn out up to 7 jumbos a month. This is the largest building on Earth, equivalent in area to over 50 football fields. It's so large that clouds can form near the 11-story high ceiling. The distance is so great that employees need bikes to get around.
This is the largest building in the world. It's almost a city. It's like an indoor city here.
Everett has to be big. The 747 has a wing area equivalent to a parking lot for 45 cars, and a tail the height of a 6-story building. In the storage department, they hold 6 million parts for its construction. Everett was specially built to house the 747 project.
We had to go out and select a new area to build a factory, clear the area, and then put that building up. The largest building in the world, to build the largest plane in the world.
It was a phenomenal undertaking. Earthworkers moved as much earth as the Panama Canal and Grand Coulee Dam projects combined. They even built a railroad to bring materials to the site. Battling everything Mother Nature could throw at them: windstorms, snowstorms, mudslides. They completed the first phase in just 6 months.
Everything about the 747 was big. Everybody was incredibly dedicated. That's the name that they ended up getting. They were called the Incredibles. Now, this hat shows the emblem that they chose to symbolize them. Paul Bunyan, the giant who cleared the wilderness. It symbolizes this giant project.
Even as Sutter and his team worked on the prototype, the factory went up around them. There was no time to waste.
Well, I marvel that now it takes them 5 and 6 and 7 years to do a new airplane, and all the engineers have a high-powered computer.
Joe didn't have 7 years, or even 5. He had less than 2 to complete an aircraft that was now entering the record books. With 4.5 million parts, 100 miles of wiring, and wings weighing over 25 tons, it was also becoming extremely heavy. Engineers calculated that the paint alone would add around a ton.
Weight is the #1 problem of any aircraft. The very first airplane ever made that flew was the Wright Flyer. It came in overweight. It's a very, very difficult ongoing compromise and a constant fight.
Sutter had to get the weight down, or the 747 wouldn't fly. The crisis put him in direct conflict with the hard-nosed Pan Am president, Juan Trippe.
I had to put several presentations in front of Juan Trippe, which were not as friendly as they could have been, because they kept adding weight to the airplane.
Beyond what track could give us.
They wanted heavier galleys and heavier seats and heavier lavatories, heavier this, heavier that. And the weight of the airplane was getting out of hand.
Sutter explained to Trippe, either cut your demands or cut the number of fare-paying passengers to save weight.
He took it pretty well. He didn't like it, but he didn't throw a tantrum or anything.
But all this innovation was coming at a price. The 747 was costing Boeing $33 million a day in current prices.
The amount of money that was being spent on all aspects of this program was pretty astronomical.
Boeing gambled the company, millions of dollars on this project.
They took a big risk on it.
To add to a looming cash crisis, the supersonic project was way behind schedule and over budget. The banks threatened to pull out, but Boeing plowed on. To help deal with the crisis, Sutter was summoned to a high-level meeting.
My boss was one of these people that decided, well, you can do anything by just saying you're going to do it. So he's told Bill Allen, I could drop a lot of engineers.
His job was on the line, unless he cut 1,000 engineers, almost a quarter of his workforce.
I know that.
So here I am in front of Bill Allen and all my management people, telling them, hey, this is the real facts of life. We can't give up any engineers.
I'll leave it with you guys.
Sutter refused to back down.
I figured that was my last day at Boeing.
But he won the standoff. Boeing had little option but to continue with the project.
If we had dumped 1,000 engineers, the program would have collapsed. Then what would you do? Throw it out the window and declare bankruptcy?
Now it was touch and go if Boeing would go bust before the 747 was ready. And the big press launch date was fast approaching. Today, the first 747 prototype sits at the Seattle Museum of Flight. With peeling paint, RA-001 is a shadow of its former self as the museum struggles to raise funds to restore it.
This is the #1 airplane that was designed never to go into airline service. It was designed as sort of a development airplane. We did a lot of interesting engineering work on this thing to get the airplane tuned up.
The prototype still has some of the water barrels used to simulate payloads during tests. Banks of equipment that could measure how the airframe and engines would perform under the stress of flight. But 45 years ago, this museum exhibit was a hive of activity. Sutter and his team raced to get the prototype ready to show to the world's press.
Well, the media were all excited because here was a new airplane, which hadn't happened for a while. But there were more parts on the floor than in the airplane. We were still designing and testing the airplane, and we didn't get an airplane put together until 2 days before we rolled it out.
With paint still wet and parts missing, the prototype was rolled out to an expectant press and public. But for Bill Allen, it was a relief just to have something to show Pan Am and the nervous bankers. It was also time to reassure the 25 other airlines who'd placed orders that this was the aircraft sensation of the decade.
Rollout Day came to us as real excitement. It was pure adrenaline as far as I was concerned. TV cameras were there, everything was rolling. We were all invited along to stand outside and watch this magnificent thing come out of the hangar. And I think it gave everybody a thrill. I can't imagine anybody who didn't feel, pretty proud of that day.
26 air hostesses prepared for the christening. It didn't quite go to plan.
Don't break it yet. The cadence is going to be 1, 2, 3. Got it? Okay, wait. All right, we'll do it again. 1, 2, 3.
But behind the excitement, there was one thing that Boeing didn't shout about. The aircraft couldn't fly. The engines were purely decorative.
Yeah, when they rolled it out, very dramatic. Gargantuan airplane with this great promise of hauling so many people so far and a great promise of changing aviation. The question was that promise going to be realized or not?
So while we enjoyed the day, I think we realized that it was eyes down and start working as soon as all of the publicity had gone away.
Sutter and his team had just 54 days before the prototype was scheduled for its first flight. And they had a major crisis on their hands with that most vital component of an aircraft, the engines. Up to now, no commercial engine had sufficient power to lift even half the weight of a 747. But manufacturers Pratt & Whitney had developed a new, untested engine that could. The JT9D was a high-bypass turbofan, an entirely new concept. It promised good fuel efficiency, low noise, and above all, phenomenal thrust. The secret of its design, and 70% of its thrust, was a massive 8-foot fan on the front. This drew air not only into the central turbine, but also bypassed more than 5 times as much around the outside. Hence the name, high bypass.
Now, that is more efficient from both a fuel flow standpoint, and it's also more efficient from a noise standpoint.
The added bonus was that at the back, the roar from the exhaust of the inner turbine was enveloped and softened by the bypassing air. Pratt & Whitney promised to make the 747 quieter than jets half the size, yet 2.5 times as powerful. Everything depended on its success. But in tests, it seemed they had promised too much.
What you'd see, first of all, is the whole thing shake. At the same time, you'd hear a very big bang.
Sometimes the flames are longer than the airplane. And of course, when that happens, you burn up things like turbine blades.
No one could work out what the fault was. During the 747's development, a total of 60 multi-million-dollar engines were written off. But Boeing couldn't wait any longer. They had to prove to the world that the 747 could fly. Two months behind schedule, test pilot Jack Waddell and his crew walked out to the prototype. Today, they would risk their lives to see if it flew. Waddell's co-pilot was Brian Weigel.
It was an incredible day. You have to realize there was this enormous pressure from all over the world. This thing had drawn the attention of the aviation industry over the globe. And there was a huge mob watching it.
Bill Allen was a risk taker. He was literally betting Boeing on this airplane. And there was a lot of nervousness about this. There were a lot of people saying that it wasn't going to fly, so there was a lot of pressure to make this happen.
Bad weather had threatened to cancel the flight. But shortly before 11 a.m., Sutter dropped off his wife Nancy at the far end of the runway.
There were a lot of people, including people that my wife would meet in the grocery store, asking her, does your husband know what he's doing? Will that airplane even fly? So on that first flight day, I took her out to that point and I said, Nancy, when that airplane goes by you, you're going to see the wheels leave the ground right here.
Test pilot Jack Waddell and his crew deliberately wore their everyday clothes as they entered the flight deck.
There was so much skepticism about the 747. Would this thing really work? Is it way too big? And, you know, will it even fly? And so on. So I think Jack's concept was to make it an everyday occurrence kind of, look, this airplane's safe, look at us. We're just dressed here in our normal suits and ties.
But despite outward appearances, Jack Waddell was worried about the engines. Would they explode on takeoff?
Double-checked.
On the first flight, Jack Waddell was concerned enough. We actually put in about 40 automobile batteries, hooked them up to hydraulic pumps, so in case he lost all 4 engines, he'd have flight controls.
At around 11:20 a.m., RA001 headed off for the runway. It was time.
Ready for takeoff? Already 001, roger that. Let's roll.
Taking care not to throttle the engines up too quickly, for fear they'd explode, Waddell prepared for takeoff. This was the moment of truth. Would the 747 fly? Test pilot Jack Waddell taxied the 747 prototype for its first takeoff.
All the lights were green, so we taxied out to the runway and, of course, checked all the engines.
The plane was empty, except for 3 crew. It was too dangerous to risk more lives.
In that period of history, we didn't have simulators to prepare you for the airplane flying.
Nobody knew for sure how the 747 would behave. The maths and the wind tunnels told them it should fly. But would it?
01, roger that. 80 knots.
Jack pulled back, the nose came up, wheels left the ground. The engines were all running. That moment, we had a great feeling of relief. Now we can go about our work, you know. It was a glorious feeling.
The only thing I can compare it to is the birth of your first child. I mean, it is cool. It's great stuff.
The vision of that airplane, as big as it was, lifting off for the first time, was just magic. And away it went, and it overflew the airfield. And I think, you know, the hair on every back of everybody's neck was standing up. Certainly was on mine.
It's a very easily flyable airplane. Still in the takeoff configuration. We haven't tried to change anything yet.
Everything looks very normal on the right side, Jack. And I'll go and check the left.
Beautiful.
We also knew the press was listening to everything we said as well, so we weren't going to say anything bad in any case. But it was a great feeling.
All went well until Waddell tried out the flaps on the wings.
We were retracting the flaps, and there was a distinctive clunk sound when it happened.
One of the flaps that slows the aircraft for landing had come loose. There was a danger it might have come off.
Jack decided that we shouldn't venture any further, and we didn't want something more serious to happen.
Now, at greater speed than planned, came the dangerous part, landing 300 tons of aircraft.
Many people, again, said, okay, she'll take off and fly, but how do you get that big thing onto the ground, especially with a pilot sitting 35 feet in the air at touchdown? Of course, I was waiting for that landing and get rid of this last concern.
Then when it came in for landing, of course, since you're looking down the runway at it, it really looks slow. I kept thinking to myself, you're too slow, you're too slow, you're too slow.
He made a nice approach, and he looked pretty confident. And of course, I'm sitting there relaxed, and Jack has to make a good landing in front of all those people.
20.
When Waddell landed the first time, he had no problem at all. And the airplane proved that it was a good flying machine on that first flight.
The feeling of completion, actually, once you've slowed down and start to taxi, you feel you're pretty well completed. And that huge mob awaiting, but the fact that this had come off after all this time was a great feeling of superb satisfaction.
The Boeing team had worked miracles, turning sketches on paper into the largest commercial airliner ever built, and all in record time.
I guess this sounds complacent or something, but that thing is just ridiculously easy to fly. It's just a pilot's dream.
The 747 could fly, and the engines did not explode, at least this time. But now they had to prove to the aviation authorities that the plane was safe enough for passengers. No matter how bad the weather, the tests began. They had just 11 months left. Taking the aircraft to the maximum speed before it took off, the brakes were slammed on. The wheels caught fire, but the crew had to wait an anxious 5 minutes before putting them out. Waddell deliberately put the 747 into death-defying stalls. And he scraped its tail along the runway to simulate too steep a takeoff. Above all, the authorities wanted to check the plane could be evacuated in just 90 seconds. The 747 would be carrying more passengers than ever before. A single accident could kill over 400 people. But soon the 747 was passing with flying colors. Not least because Sutter had installed unparalleled safety features. 3 backup systems that would keep the aircraft flying, even if only one was working.
This was his most important value in designing the 747. It was the thing that kept him awake at night. What would happen if it crashed on its first flight? It would have been the end of the Boeing company.
We did, I think, establish a new standard for airplane design, and later on, I think most people tend to follow that, not maybe as well as the 747, but you'll see that safety going into all of the more modern airplanes.
These advanced safety features were to save Sutter's life. During a test flight, the pilot prepared to land at Boeing's Renton airfield.
Renton is a very short runway. The pilot that was bringing it in had not had much time in the 747. It was a cold, wet, windy day. And I bumped a ride with him just to experience it.
Sutter saw the pilot was nervous.
40, 30, 20.
And he brought the airplane a little bit too short, but he did tear off one of the wing gears. He ground the outboard engines on the right side into the ground, but the airplane handled itself quite well.
The aircraft behaved so safely, it even impressed the strict aviation authorities who were watching. But not everything went smoothly. During the tests, the 747 team hit every aircraft designer's worst nightmare. The 7-letter F word, Flutter.
Increasing speed to Mach 0.7.
At certain speeds, as wind tunnel tests show, Flutter causes violent vibrations that can shake an aeroplane apart.
Pan Am and others wanted us to design an airplane as fast as we could, which meant that we had to thin the wing and sweep the wing. And that can cause a condition called flutter. And if you tame flutter, that's fine, but if you don't, you can lose a wing.
The wing was a miracle of engineering, based on Nazi swept-wing designs of the Second World War. It could change its shape to suit every flying condition. Massive triple-slotted flaps unwound to give 90% extra lift at slow speeds, folding away for faster flight. The wing did all this, yet could be bent at the tip 20 feet before braking. But the dangerous flutter threatened the entire project. Jack Waddell deliberately pushed the aircraft into the danger zone.
Mach 0.75.
To explore the flutter area, which came normally with a certain airspeed and altitude, you would approach it very cautiously by only advancing your speed a little bit at a time.
Mach 0.8.
The flutter started.
You knew you were in dangerous territory. It's a very dangerous phenomena and has to be carefully controlled.
Okay, decreasing speed.
But normally that meant right away you backed off. You pulled the throttles back and you slowed down. As soon as you slowed down, then you left the danger area with some more information.
After a month of hard flying, they worked out a fix. Small heavy weights at the tip of the wings dampened the vibrations.
We did control it. We found the answers. We got it done, but it took a lot of time.
Time that Boeing didn't have. Boeing executives decided they needed to fly the prototype to France for the world's prestigious Paris Air Show. It was a business opportunity they couldn't afford to miss, but a massive gamble. Would the unreliable engines last the 5,000-mile journey? Sutter hitched a ride. They got lucky. The engines behaved, and they parked alongside the Anglo-French supersonic Concorde, also making its debut at the show.
It was sort of the hit of the show because there was this big airplane, and right next door to it was the little Concorde. And I made the comment to the press that this is Big Brother looking down at Little Brother, and I tell you, the Europeans didn't like that comment, but what could they do?
On the way home, Sutter had a rare chance to relax. But as they approached Seattle, one of the Pratt & Whitney engines flamed out.
Looks like we got a surge on engine 4. Engine 4 shut down.
We got away with it, but we had to treat the engine very gingerly until we got it fixed.
I think everybody at Boeing felt that we had a very serious engine problem, and Pratt & Whitney just wasn't taking it seriously enough. They may have been working on it, but we didn't feel they were working hard enough.
With months before the first 747s were due to go into service, production models started piling up outside the Everett factory.
Very few of the airplanes ever had engines on them. They usually had a concrete block hanging off of the pylon where the engine is supposed to mount.
The concrete blocks stopped the aircraft from tipping up on their tails. Boeing had to fix the engines or go bust. The catastrophic flameouts threatened the whole 747 program. Without reliable engines, the Jumbo would never see service. Test pilot Jack Waddell decided it was time to give the engine manufacturers a wake-up call. He took the president of Pratt & Whitney for a ride and showed him the problem.
Let me show you my problem.
It was a very dramatic demonstration because those surges always created a loud boom.
To prove it wasn't just one rogue engine, Waddell throttled up number 2.
He was about to do it again, and the Pratt guy said, I got it, I understand. Yeah, okay. And that test was over. Jack was merciless. He had no sympathy for him.
The showdown paid off. The cause of the flameouts was found. Under certain conditions, the large front fan distorted the inner engine casing, so that it no longer made a snug fit around the spinning turbine blades. This caused the air and fuel mixture to break up and explode. But by simply stiffening the casing, they hoped that they had solved the problem. Engineers raced to fit the engines. The Jumbo at last could go into service. For Joe Sutter, it had been a long, hard battle.
The fact that we got the airplane done in time and it was a good airplane is attesting to how well the people that worked with me did their job. But it was a fight all the way.
At 7 p.m., the first fee-paying passengers took their seats for the inaugural flight from New York's JFK to London Heathrow.
It was quite a media event, as you might imagine, with celebrities. The airplane taxied out, and all of a sudden, we see the rotating beacon coming back toward the terminal. And it was reported that they had an engine problem.
The passengers were brought back to the terminal.
I'd rather be off than on.
Any sense of fear?
No, I mean, they said something was burning, and we got off.
Something was burning. It was an engine.
We saw molten metal in the tailpipe of the engine, which meant that the engine had to be replaced.
There was no time. Pan Am switched to a standby aircraft, hoping no one would notice.
I do remember that we re-stenciled the name of the airplane to the inaugural name.
After a 6-hour delay, the 747 eventually took off. While in London, everybody waited.
I think the man who wrote this on the top of a press handout from Boeing's will have a very, very red face indeed this morning. He's right, we haven't.
It had not been the launch Pan Am or Boeing had hoped for. The 747 did cause a sensation when it landed in England. But despite a record 92 aircraft rolling off the production line in the first year, the Jumbo revolution was coming too late for Boeing. Or rather, the cash was. The company faced bankruptcy.
Everybody, I think, was concerned. Nobody took it for granted they'd have a job tomorrow morning. It was that palpable.
Then, in May 1971, Boeing teetered on the brink of extinction. The ambitious supersonic airliner the company had bet its future on was cancelled. Environmentalists' fears over noise and pollution had persuaded Congress to cut Boeing's federal funding. Now the company's future rested on the 747, the aircraft that was only supposed to be a stopgap. Boeing cut its workforce by nearly 2/3. 60,000 jobs were lost.
Somebody who thankfully had a sense of humor when he left put up a big board down by the airport that said, you know, the last guy to leave Seattle, please put out the lights. And, you know, it wasn't funny. That was a bittersweet kind of a piece of humor.
But the 747 saved the day. New orders bankrolled Boeing. The Jumbo was an instant hit with the public. No one had seen an airliner this big before. Soon, Jumbos started crisscrossing the globe.
What do you think, George?
Harriet, don't rush me.
TV ads sung its praise.
George, the kitchens are just perfect. And all this room, George.
Very nice, dear.
Wow.
Even engine manufacturers Pratt & Whitney were eager to announce the age of the wide-bodied jet.
Harriet, we'll take it.
The 747, the 70s way to fly. Beautiful.
The 747 became the must-have airplane. It was the plane to have in your fleet. It was the flagship of any airline fleet, and you just didn't have an airline unless you had a 747.
Well, the 747 was an immediate hit. It was the epitome of the jet age and luxury air travel.
Look at that.
The 747 was unstoppable. For the first time in history, people could travel cheaply yet quickly from continent to continent.
The world has shrunk, they say. It's true, in the sense that air travel has brought places closer in time. The world is smaller.
In just 6 months, the 747 had taken a staggering 1 million passengers. Return transatlantic flights dropped by almost a half to $250. But it wasn't just cheap seats. The Jumbos introduced a new age of luxurious air travel. The company responsible for the new interior design and the world's first overhead locker was Walter Darwin Teague Associates.
What they did was incredibly clever. They developed 5 different zones throughout the airplane. And then the magic to those zones was to take all of the lavatories and the galleys and the bulkheads and mount those along center lines so that it actually made a physical separation between those compartments. And it made each of these spaces a little bit more living room-like. We did actually go through a period in the 80s where day glow colors and upholstery were actually very, very popular. And we did some things there that I think probably today we'd look back and kind of not be so happy with, but they were really beautiful at the time.
The Jumbo was transforming the aviation industry. With up to 16 cabin crew to each 747, airlines recruited more staff. Pan Am stewardess Amelia de Geer started working on 747s when they first entered service.
Pan Am was the iconic airline. I would not have flown with any other airline. They were very strict about weight. We were not required to wear girdles, but we had to be slim.
Amelia soon developed a love affair with the aircraft, not just with any 747, but one of the first that Pan Am ever bought. Clipper America, registration N747PA.
It was love at first sight. She was an amazing vision.
It was a relationship that would last 40 years, but it started badly, with the first serious accident to involve a Jumbo.
I was on Clipper America, and we were fully loaded fuel-wise to go from San Francisco to Tokyo when we hit a big problem.
At the last minute, the crew were advised of a change to a shorter runway, but they forgot to recalculate their takeoff speed.
We're too close to the end of the runway. 156 knots.
They climbed too late, hitting the runway lights.
We took one beam with us. It came with us right through the belly, and it went through 4 rows of seats. Those 4 seats, miraculously, were not occupied. Otherwise, it would have been human shish kebab. There was one person not so luckily located where the beam came up from the floor, and it amputated his foot. Another gentleman was in the position where it sliced his thigh and his arm quite badly. I mean, you could see the bone.
There was a doctor on board, but there was little he could do.
The passenger with the amputated foot had to be told there was no painkiller on board. He had to grin and bear it.
The crew circled the 747 for over an hour, assessing the damage and dumping fuel. Then they turned back to attempt a landing.
Sir, can you keep your head down?
We asked the passengers to brace for impact. I knew somewhere in my mind that my mom and dad were thinking about me.
The accident had severed 3 of the 4 hydraulic systems and damaged the landing gear. The situation was critical. They had no alternative but to attempt a landing.
We started to make our descent, but then the plane started to reel. It was the loudest landing. And then everything was quiet.
The 747's unique safety features brought Amelia and her passengers to safety.
It was a miracle. It could have been possibly the worst crash. But in my mind, the 747 saved our lives.
Incredibly, Clipper America was repaired and went back into service.
My love affair continued, and I did enjoy flying her from time to time. Then all of a sudden, she disappeared.
Amelia learned of the fate of her jumbo, now 40 years old, and renamed after Pan Am's founder, 1T Tripp.
She ended up apparently in South Korea as some kind of restaurant. How demeaning. Then I heard they finally dismantled her and she doesn't exist anymore. Why couldn't they have kept an airplane like her, you know, for all posterity?
During the 80s and 90s, the world shrank as jumbos carried first millions, then billions of passengers around the world. The jumbo revolution had arrived. But soon the hard-working 747s were showing their age. Boeing had to do something, and fast, if its flagship aircraft was to stay alive. On April 29, 1988, the jumbo gave birth to the 747-400. It was a radical overhaul of the now aging aircraft. Advanced computer systems eliminated the flight engineer. Little winglets smoothed turbulence at the tip of the wings, saving fuel. Now it could travel a third of the way around the globe without stopping. The advances rejuvenated the 747, making it once again the aircraft by which others were judged. And it also cemented the jumbo as an all-time favorite with flight crews.
Every pilot is deeply impressed because it's the most beautiful airplane in the world. It just feels very good.
Cabin crews also love the jumbo, not least because when the passengers are fast asleep, they too get some shut-eye in a secret hideaway at the back of the plane.
It's actually accessed, the crew rest area, by a special door, which is on this side. This is the door right here. So on a busy flight, this is indeed the stairway to heaven for the cabin crew. This is where we enter our cabin crew rest, which is right here. We have 10 bunk beds where the crew can rest and be refreshed after the long flight. Now, the biggest difficulty here, of course, is while you're asleep or resting is not to get your uniform creased. So the secret there is to hang it in the wardrobe, and it's either undies or a little something, pajamas you brought with you.
But without doubt, the most famous person to develop a deep love for the aircraft is actor and pilot John Travolta.
First time I ever saw this, I was flying on it when I was 18. I flew on a 747 from New York to California, Los Angeles, to start my film career. It was truly impressive.
John Travolta is a qualified pilot and a Qantas ambassador. In return for his star value, the airline offered him his own 707, which he can taxi directly into his home in Florida. The deal also helped him realize a lifelong ambition to fly a 747. But his instructor didn't make it easy.
He threw a doozy at me. He killed 2 engines. I had hydraulic problems, I had electric problems. I had about 5 major failures, plus others, instrument failures, what have you.
Travolta landed safely, and the experience didn't dent his love for the 747. In fact, quite the reverse.
You're dealing with a pedigree of aircraft, and you feel it when you're flying it. You know you have an airplane beneath you. It's solid state, if you will. It's majestic. There's a saying, if it's not Boeing, I ain't going. And there's a reason for that. It's the quality of craftsmanship and design.
Qantas offered Travolta his own 747, but he reluctantly had to turn it down.
I loved it. I was so impressed that I was being offered it, but the practicality of my owning it personally, I do well in life, but I'm not a sheikh, or I don't have this kind of money to support that kind of plane.
A personal 747 may be too expensive for John Travolta, but there are mega rich who can afford their own jumbo jet. Greenpoint Technologies specializes in turning 747s into flying palaces. Optional extras include the aerolift, which takes you directly from your car into the aircraft. And you can have 8 private suites in the loft area. Every luxury and taste is catered for. To date, 12 of these pimped aircraft have been sold. The names of those who can afford the $500 million plus price tag are kept strictly confidential. The 747 has proven endlessly adaptable, and some are built for really exceptional roles. For nearly 35 years, Jumbos piggybacked the space shuttles, returning them to the Kennedy Space Center. The Evergreen tanker is the world's largest fire extinguisher. This jumbo can drop 20,000 gallons of fire retardant over a swathe of land 4 miles long. And this 747 has on board the world's largest airborne astronomical observatory, NASA's SOFIA. At 45,000 feet, the thin atmosphere offers views of the universe not possible from ground-based telescopes. Jumbos have also been adapted to become warplanes. This is the experimental YAL-1 airborne laser, designed to fry enemy missiles at a distance of several hundred miles. But there is one 747 that is the most recognized aircraft in the world. Air Force One.
Wherever this plane goes around the world when it carries our president, it's a visible symbol of the United States. It shows what we can do as Americans.
There are 2 identical modified 747s, The aircraft only becomes Air Force One when the president is on board. Inside is a mix of secret communication systems, offices and suites for the president and his staff. It can carry a full press corps and even has its own fully equipped hospital.
All of us that flew the 747 in the military were, we developed a love for the aircraft. The plane had the capability to go anywhere in the world at any time, climb to altitude. It was just the perfect machine.
At the front of the plane is the president's suite, while on the deck above is the communications center. Then comes the kitchens, conference rooms, a guest section, and at the back, the press. But this is not only a flying White House, it is also a military aircraft.
Self-defense on the aircraft, can't really talk about, but there are other classified modifications for the aircraft to allow the president to survive in a nuclear environment.
Air Force One costs nearly $180,000 an hour to fly and is lovingly looked after by a team of 100.
It had to be hand-polished every time it came in after a mission, because it had to be perfect. You represent the United States of America, but the other part is you're representing the Boeing 747, and it was just an immaculate aircraft.
It not only transports the president, in times of national emergency, he can govern the country from the air. And it was during 9/11 that it faced its most dramatic test. President Bush was visiting a school in Florida when he learned of the attack on the Twin Towers.
When it came to game day and time to move the President of the United States, the 747 was ready to go.
Within 15 minutes, Bush was climbing into Air Force One with Colonel Mark Tillman at the controls. The crew knew the aircraft as a target for terrorists.
We started getting reports of people at the end of the runway that were unknown that may have a long gun, may have a weapon to go ahead and shoot us as we take off.
Rotate. 160.
Tillman took countermeasures. He put on full thrust and pulled hard on the control column.
The president said he felt the plane pretty much just take off and sit on its tail and climb straight up. So it was an aggressive climb.
Shortly after takeoff, Tillman was radioed that another airliner was heading towards them. Commercial jets had destroyed the Twin Towers. Now another was on the president's tail. Cockpit voice recorders tell us the chilling story that day.
Air Force One, we have traffic above you that is descending into you. You're not in contact with them. Air Force One, copy that.
With no response from the pursuing jet, Colonel Tillman judged it was a serious threat.
We weren't sure what this airliner was going to do because it continued to descend. It had all the markings of a hijacked aircraft at that point.
Tillman took immediate evasive action. It may be called a jumbo, but it's the fastest airliner in the sky, capable of reaching nearly Mach 1.
The 747 has a tremendous speed advantage over most aircraft, so that was our plan of attack, was to try to outrun it.
Tillman waited to see if the airliner would continue the chase. Then, as the 747 pulled away, the mysterious blip on the radar disappeared.
The aircraft did not follow us. It continued descending.
The threat was a false alarm. It was a regular flight. The airliner's identification responder had failed. But Air Force One was not out of danger yet. Soon another message came in, this time from the Vice President.
The Vice President advised the President that they had just gotten information that Angel was next. Angel was the classified call sign of Air Force One.
With another hijacked airliner's mission still unclear, could this be the one now coming for the President? Fighters were scrambled.
What a great feeling it is to see a fighter on your wing when you know you got a long day ahead of you to, protect the President of the United States.
But soon they realized that Air Force One was not the target. The last of the hijacked planes had crashed in Pennsylvania.
That was kind of a sad moment for us when we knew Americans had been killed. on that airliner. The president was definitely deeply saddened, as well as the rest of us that were flying along.
Angel was safe, and after a couple of landings to address the nation, Bush decided he must get back to the White House.
747 was amazing at that point. I mean, we went as fast as the plane could go because we had to get him back to Washington.
At over 700 miles per hour, close to the speed of sound, Tillman took the president home. The immediate threat was over. Air Force One had fulfilled its role to serve and protect the president. During those first hectic hours of 9/11, President Bush was in by far the safest place he could have been. Traveling in a jumbo is many times safer than sitting at home. In its first 10 years, only 6 aircraft were lost.
It has an amazing safety record. It's safer than walking across the street to get your mail.
But when there have been accidents,
I didn't think I was going to die. I knew I was going to die.
the 747 has been the hero of the hour. In early 2013, the world was shocked by amateur footage of a 747 freighter crashing in Afghanistan. But the accident was not the fault of the plane.
The 747 is an extraordinarily safe airplane. Most of the accidents of the airplane had nothing to do with the airplane.
And the same was true when 2 jumbos collided on a runway in Tenerife, Spain, in the deadliest accident in aviation history. But while tragic, total losses in 747s are less than 3,000, an incredibly small figure set against the nearly 3.7 billion carried by jumbos. In short, you have a 1,000,000 to 1 chance of being killed in a 747. Just how resilient an aircraft was demonstrated on United Flight 811, leaving Honolulu Airport for New Zealand. The 747 was full for the 15-hour flight. Chief purser that evening was Laura Brentlinger.
We were in the aftermath of Lockerbie, and I instructed the flight attendants, make sure when you get on the aircraft, make sure there aren't any bags left behind, look for any suspicious items.
For experienced aviation lawyer Bruce Lampert, seated on the upper deck, it was the start of a well-earned holiday.
Hopefully we're going to lay on a beach somewhere and just totally get airplanes, litigation, accidents, injuries, human suffering out of my mind and be a tourist.
The crew of UA 811 were highly experienced.
Rotate.
Captain Cronin was just 2 months away from retirement. First Officer Al Slater trained other 747 pilots.
Dave was a good friend, and he was always fun to fly with. There are pilots that just love to fly, and Dave was one of those.
We knew people were tired, so we usually on those flights would get up quickly, get them something to drink, and tuck them in, so to speak.
Once we got airborne, you get the drone of those 4 big engines, and I think the majority of the passengers, they wanted to turn down the lights, put on their headphones, and get some rest.
But at 23,000 feet, it suddenly became clear that Flight 811 was going to be anything but routine.
There was this huge hiss, like a hissing sound, and we all looked at each other and said, "What was that?" And before we could get the words "that" out of our mouths, there was this tremendous explosion. My first thought was, oh my God, it's my worst nightmare ever, it's a bomb.
The instruments were just going crazy. I mean, it was just a mess. We thought a bomb had gone off in the airplane.
Just 16 minutes after takeoff, the right side of the fuselage blew out.
Everything that wasn't fastened down was airborne. And the airplane was transfigured from a normal 747 to a disaster scene.
9 passengers were sucked out to their deaths. Laura Brentlinger managed to grab the staircase before she too would have been killed.
My feet were off the air and I was literally horizontal. The decompression is like this huge vacuum that's just sucking at you, trying to pull you out. It felt like we were just free-falling, nose-diving. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, now we're going to crash into the ocean.
What do you want to do about the landing gear?
The cockpit recorder gives us the words spoken that night.
Well, hold off on that until we get on the glide slope.
The emergency checklist told Captain Cronin to put his landing gear down, but he threw away the rulebook. He knew that the drag from the gear would cause the plane to descend rapidly.
If we had lowered the gear, instead of being at 14,000 feet at this time, we'd have been down around 7, and we never would have made the airport.
It takes a very experienced pilot to disobey a checklist. Dave Cronin was a lifetime glider pilot. I don't know whether he knew it at the time or not, but he was in the heaviest glider he was ever going to fly.
Engine number 3 was on fire, damaged by debris and passengers sucked into the fans.
I looked out the window and I saw one of the engines on fire. I mean, there was fire coming out of the rear of the engine, and there was fire coming out of the intake of the engine.
We got a hell of a control problem here.
Dave was such a good pilot. I knew if he's having this much trouble, that there's some real serious stuff going on.
You're dumping as quick as you can.
They started dumping fuel to make the plane less explosive if they crashed.
We got a problem with number 4 engine. And number 4.
Then they lost another engine.
So now we're on 2 engines, and we're 700,000 pounds, way too heavy to fly on 2 engines.
Eventually, the aircraft leveled off. Pressure between the inside and the outside cabin had stabilized, so there was no threat of suction anymore. It was the most eerie thing because you look out into this void, black night, and there was a moon out. And for one moment I went, oh my God, how gorgeous, how absolutely beautiful.
We all ponder, how will you act in a crisis? Will you be brave? Will you do the right thing? And we all like to think that we are heroes and we would do good things and help people. And this situation, there was, the horribleness of it is there was nothing you could do. You can't even scream because nobody would hear you because the noise was so loud. You had to sit there.
The crew had not seen the extent of the damage.
You want me to go downstairs and check?
Yeah.
Flight engineer Thomas went to inspect.
He got down, halfway down the staircase, saw the hole, looked at me, and his eyes were like saucers. They were huge, ghost white. And I screamed to him, dear God, please get us down.
The whole right side. The right side is gone from bow.
Mark came back up. You could tell by the look on his face that he wasn't very happy.
Looks like a bomb.
Fuselage?
Yes. Fuselage. It's just open.
And he said something to the effect of, the whole side of the airplane's gone and we have people missing. And I remember looking out the window and thinking, my kids are going to be really upset, you know, if we don't make it back. And then I consciously thought, I have time to think about that. Go back to work.
I didn't think I was going to die. I knew I was going to die. It was too difficult. Engines on fire, structural damage, descending. I didn't think there was any way they were going to keep that airplane in the air.
I knew that ditchings were pretty much unsurvivable. And then I thought, okay, well, how am I going to die? Am I going to be sucked under immediately? Am I going to die at impact? And then I just started praying. And my father had given me this cross when I first started flying because he said, do you want anything? And I said, I want a cross. So I just started praying.
United Take 11, runway 4 right. You are cleared to land.
Flight 811 was now just 16 miles from Honolulu and safety. But they were losing altitude.
I don't think we're going to make this.
And then all of a sudden, one of the passengers in the back of B zone, he's pointing and he's mouthing the word lights. And at that point, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a glimmer of hope here.
This is like a miracle. You looked out the windows and you saw land. And everybody, their hands went like this, and they're pointing, and everybody's going like that. Land, land.
We started yelling, you know, brace, get your head down, keep your heads down. But now we're coming into land. Are we going to crash and burn?
Okay. Let's try the gear. I'm trying the gear. Okay, you got the gear down.
But there hadn't been time to dump enough fuel. The aeroplane was still overweight. If it landed this heavy, the landing gear could have crumpled on impact. And the fuel could have exploded in a mushroom of fire.
Enough power. 100 feet. 50 feet. 30. 10. 0.
And as soon as those wheels touched the ground, there was a wave of cheers.
We blew some tires, and we had a gear fire on the right body gear. But Dave made just a beautiful landing.
And it was so smooth, and then we start slowing down. I said, oh my God, we've landed.
Our job is to get the people there if we can, you know, as safely as possible. That's what we get paid for.
The airplane got to a stop. The doors were open, the slides were deployed, and then I'm left to wander around the tarmac. And it's the first time I saw the hole from the outside, and it looked immense.
We just could not believe, we couldn't believe it.
It was like, wow. I mean, there was an expletive, I'm pretty sure. I was dumbfounded that it, you know, that the airplane would even fly like that.
I brought 341 people home, and you got to give us some credit for that, and I do.
It was funny because they debated whether to fly it home and fix it, and I said, I'll fly it back if you want me to. And everybody, you will? Sure, why not, you know? So, no, it was an awesome airplane, and I just can't say enough good things about it.
A few days later, Laura went to take a look.
I think that's when the impact hit me. And I said to myself, thank you for saving me. I said it to the plane. I literally, if I could have hugged it, I would have. But it was thank you for saving my life.
The accident had been caused by a faulty cargo door that had blown out. The resulting decompression had ripped off the side of the aircraft. Later, investigators found a design flaw with the cargo latches. But the incredible structural strength of the 747 held it together. And despite being 20 years old, engineers were able to repair the damage safely and return it to service. Few crashes have ever been the result of design flaws in the 747. A remarkable testimony to Joe Sutter and his team that has made the 747 one of the safest aircraft ever built. But how much longer will the jumbo stay in the skies? Now in its 43rd year. The 747, designed and built in a few years in the 1960s, is still flying 40 years later. But recently, it began to show its age. Customer orders were dropping, and then in 2005 came a serious rival. The Super Jumbo, Airbus's A380, the largest airliner in the world. With 2 decks, it can carry around 150 more passengers. But the 747 isn't ready to lie down and die, at least not yet. In a blaze of publicity, Boeing launched the 747-8 Intercontinental in 2011. At the ceremony, father of the 747, Joe Sutter, was the first to be taken on stage to see the new aircraft.
747-8 shows how the basic architecture of the initial airplane was right, because it looks just like the original airplane. But the thing that annoys me a little bit is I talked to the pilots that fly it, and they used to tell me that the 747-400 was their favorite airplane. Now they're saying the 747-8 is their favorite airplane.
Boeing is eager to boast about the Dash 8's latest advances.
The 747-8 is really an entirely new aircraft. By far the most fuel-efficient aircraft in aviation today. This wing is completely new, and it is a wing that results in very minimum drag, even at flying at very high speeds.
While Boeing can't claim it is the largest, it is still the longest and the fastest. In test flights, it came within 8 miles per hour of going supersonic. The performance is in part due to the Dash 8's new GE-NX engines. At $20 million each, they are not cheap, but their combined power is like having a whole extra one of the original engines. They lift more weight, yet they are 30% quieter.
We've had control towers not realize the aircraft has taken off because they didn't hear it.
The Dash 8 has also had a complete makeover on the inside.
The first things passengers notice when they come aboard a 747-8 is the sense of spaciousness. You also have design elements designed to draw your eye across the cabin, makes it feel bigger, plus that stairway going up all immediately increases your sense of architectural depth.
Boeing is confident this new jumbo has a bright future, not just because of its technical innovation, but because it is the youngest sibling of the world's most loved and respected aircraft.
Why I love my job so much is when people ask me what is my role and I tell them I'm the 47 brand manager, almost always the response is I love that airplane. And I don't know if they'd say that about any other airplane. And they'll tell me stories, the first time they flew it as a child, the last time they flew it across the world on a big trip. And so what I'm trying to do in positioning and messaging this airplane is to really tap into that, tap into people's emotions about this airplane.
But for all their boasts, the order books for the Dash 8 are pretty near empty. Net sales last year were only 12 aircraft. Instead, airlines are buying a new generation of twin-engined aircraft. Aeroplanes like Boeing's own 787 Dreamliner. These can fly as far as a 747. But because they take smaller numbers, they don't need to use big airport hubs. Instead, they can take you direct to your international destination. Less hassle and cheaper all round. Will these aircraft kill off the 747?
2-engine airplanes are more efficient than 4-engine airplanes. And when we were putting this airplane together, 4 engines were flown because we didn't have the levels of engine reliability that we have today. Now, in many cases, engines can be put on the wing and never taken off because they're that reliable nowadays.
Whatever happens, it's likely we are going to be flying 747s for many years to come. Meanwhile, it's estimated that at any single moment, around 100,000 people are seated high in the skies in a jumbo.
Until you're in the ground, they will be flying, certainly. I don't see an end to when the 747 flies.
I don't think the 747 is going anywhere because there are too many of them and there's too much investment in its future. So I think we're going to see them probably through my lifetime.
I've flown through the whole evolution of this plane. I would miss them horribly if they had to leave. It's just such an incredible machine.
It will go out of service maybe 50 years from now. Who knows? When the time does come, when they're no longer flying, I think we'll all miss them very greatly.
747 was built in just 28 months and against all the odds. Its engineers take pride that their creation will be looked at with wonder well into the future.
I've always felt that the 747 was my airplane. It's part of me and I'm part of it. That's the way I like to feel about it.
The proud feeling that I have is that we did a hell of a good job. Designed a safe airplane that the pilots love to fly and little old ladies like to fly on it. So it's turned out to be quite a success.